Tonight we shine the spotlight on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. It officially came online today. The project has been controversial from the start, with much of the opposition driven by people in the area of Burnaby, BC, where the pipeline from Alberta ends. Aaron Collins has more on how people are feeling now in that terminal city.
This is the end of the line for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, Trans Mountain's marine terminal in Burrard Inlet. About 3 times as much oil will now move through here, and some people in this neighborhood in Burnaby aren't happy about that expansion. One big concern is the uptick in tanker traffic.
I don't know how they're going to get 34 tankers out there, like they say. That's more than one a day, you know, during high tide, because that's the only time it can go.
Those concerns were brought home by the recent crash in Baltimore, where a ship hit a bridge there, making the risk of more tankers here very real. On top of worries about spills or accidents, there are concerns about what more tanker traffic will mean for marine life, especially the impact of sound on whales.
So it really matters. It means that the ability of killer whales to efficiently hunt for food is tremendously reduced.
And it's not just what could happen on the water that worries people here in Burnaby. This tank farm and the Trans Mountain line run right through this neighborhood. And having all that oil right in their backyards worries people here.
Maybe in a couple of years, this is what we'll have to think of, is moving out, because it's just too unsafe. We'll be much older, won't be able to run if there's an incident.
Now, opponents weren't able to stop the Trans Mountain expansion. More oil and more tanker traffic in Burnaby and Burrard Inlet is the new normal. But people here say they aren't done keeping tabs on TMX, making sure Trans Mountain keeps the people here and the marine life in the area safe.
We're going to try to stop the tankers from getting out, from picking up the oil. We've tried to defend the land, now we have to defend this AOC.
So as oil starts to move down the line, the fight to stop TMX is likely over. People here on the West Coast now focused on the future, making sure moving all that oil is done as safely as possible. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Burnaby.
And this is a map showing the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. It twins the original over 1,000-kilometer long pipeline that goes from Edmonton to Burnaby, BC. Now, the pipeline is currently owned by the federal government, though they do intend to sell it, and some Indigenous groups want to buy it. Stephen Mason is the managing director of Project Reconciliation, a group trying to buy the expansion project on behalf of Indigenous communities in BC and Alberta. I asked him about how he envisions Indigenous ownership of the project.
It's in everybody's best interest that pipeline got built. And yes, there's been oppositions to the pipeline, and we believe that having the Indigenous ownership of this pipeline has that place at the table for them as stewards of the land to monitor it the way it should be in their view, but more importantly, participate in the economic benefit of owning it. And we had, lots of conversations with the Indigenous leaders along the way, both along the right of way and along the way of waiting for this pipeline to get built. And, they got to a point this is what it means for you if you owned it, by virtue of us pricing the financing and getting to a point which at the time calculated to be approximately $430 million a year of free cash flow available for distribution to the owners.
That certainly sounds like a good number, Stephen, but let me ask you, what's it going to cost to buy it? Where are the talks now? Because this ownership actually hasn't happened. The actual sale hasn't gone through.
Well, Sarah, it's interesting. I just had an interview with CTV just a few earlier today, and that was the same question that keeps coming up from the media, asking us if we could articulate what we think the value is. And first of all, I'm not going to negotiate with the federal government through the media, but we are also waiting for the tolls to be resolved. And in the original contracts, there was a basis of how to deal with the cost overruns, and there was a capped piece and an uncapped piece. And the CER is now moving towards hearings on what those tolls should be, which we understand is going to begin in the fall, and ultimately we'll get to a CER decision sometime in the spring of next year. And at that point, determine the commercial value, and our position to the federal government, and for that matter to the Canadian taxpayer, Canadian public, is that we are prepared on behalf of 100% ownership to pay commercial value for this pipeline.
Stephen, I got to ask you, you're not Indigenous yourself. How did you get involved in this project, reconciliation? Why was it important to you? What's in it for you?
Well, really, there's nothing in it for me other than just fulfilling what is a long overdue change and what I think will be ultimately the most transformational moment in history. Put it this way, I got on the plane 6 weeks after 9/11 and went to East Africa and ultimately negotiated a concession right in East Africa. We went then on to build, own, and operate and electrify the whole southern region of Tanzania, but really opened my eyes to that neo-colonialist world in sub-Saharan Africa. And when I came back to Canada, I had a bit of a different lens in terms of the colonialism in my own country and seeing really where we needed to take this conversation away from being a promise of jobs to having that discussion about ownership. And Sarah, I'm like a dog with a bone. This just means so important for us as we move forward. And as I've just mentioned, I think it will be one of the most transformational moments in history since treaties were signed over 150 years ago.
Well, Stephen, it's been great talking to you tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, and Sarah, I just want to mention that this is not just about a pipeline, and the vision to bring material Indigenous ownership to major infrastructure projects is critical on where we go forward. And Project Reconciliation, it's effectively making a active verb out of the noun, an undelivered promise of reconciliation. This is a project of reconciliation. And while we've been in a hurry up and wait, we've created an energy transition company that brings Indigenous material partnerships to major energy transition projects, carbon capture projects in Alberta, and sustainable aviation fuel. And all of this continues with this model beyond just Trans Mountain.
Stephen Mason, Managing Director of Project Reconciliation, thank you so much.
Thank you.